Exhibit information written and gathered by Diné scholar Dr. Jennifer Denetay. Sorry. Navajo Treaty of 1868. Top half is in Diné, Navajo. On the bottom heart's in English. 1, 2, 3, 4. Since the 16th century, foreign nations have sought control over Diné Navajo land. Diné warriors held the balance of power against colonial invaders for more than 200 years until the coming of the Americans in 1846. Incarceration, Fort Sumner, New Mexico, circa 1864. This is after a 250 to 450 mile march, and that's just for those who made it. The treaties are agreements between nations, between sovereigns, between peoples. Treaties preserve inherent rights that are fundamental and existed prior to the formation of the United States. Treaties define and uphold peaceful relationships between the United States and the Navajo people. Our leaders signed this treaty under extreme duress and thought it was best action for their people. Notice peoples in capital letters. So they could return to their beloved homeland. The U.S. continually undermines Navajo human rights. Nevertheless, for more than a decade, the Navajo Nation has had a presence at the United Nations and sat at the table when the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples was being crafted. The UNDRIP recognizes the Navajo people as having the right to self-determination, and by virtue of that right, we may freely determine our political status and pursue our economic, social, and cultural development. Michelle L. Cook, Navajo Rights Commission, University of Arizona Indigenous Peoples Law and Policy Program. We honor the intention of the treaty as a living document by evolving and exercising our rights to self-determination, self-sufficiency, and protection of our permanent homeland. It is our right and our responsibility to build a foundation for future generations by investing in our people, building our collective capacity to manage, control, restore, and protect our lands, territories, and resources. Janine Yazzie, et Little Colorado River Watershed Chapter Association. Navajos Cusking Corn, Fort Sumner, New Mexico, 1864 to 1868. Americans, you have a strange cause of war against the Navajos. We have waged war against the Mexicans for several years. We have plundered their villages and killed many of their people. We had the just cause for all this. This is our war. We have more right to complain of you interfering in our war than you have to quarrel with us for continuing a war that we had begun long before you got here. If you act justly, you will allow us to settle our own differences. Zarquios Largos, Diné Leader, 1846. Mel Hogan, Fort Sumner. All the relocation. There was already a war with Mexico. Mexico was the country, the United States, and then everything else was territories for Diné, Apache, Kumuya, and all the different nations throughout the U.S. And then the United States forced the Navajo, the Diné, and the Mescalero Apache to Bosque Redondo, for example. I'm right down here. Fort Defiance is destroyed, thank goodness. But they took Diné, and Kit Carson helped with this, even though he married two different indigenous women. Because the military couldn't handle it, they hired him to do a scorched earth policy through all this, through Canyon de Chelly. All the way bringing people, all the way down, murdering people, men, women, and children, all the way down. There's Santa Rosa, Bosque Redondo, Fort Sumner. So starting in Arizona, we're at the border, all the way down, almost to Texas. Navajo feeder routes, Navajo return routes. Mescalero reservation. They ended up putting Mescalero down here. They got to escape and go home because they were more from this area. This was not, this was country Mexico inhabited, supposedly, but tried to take over in Navajo and the Apache. Geronimo is an Apache. That's not his real name. But he went to war with Mexicans, soldiers, because they murdered his family. And then the United States went through all these different little towns, especially over here, to capture him and then put him on display. And the whole time they wanted... All it was because in 1846, Americans occupied Santa Fe and claimed that region that Mexico had claimed since 1820. The U.S. Army reports non-Indian travelers to the southwest lay the blame for the eventual surrender of some of the Diné squarely on their own shoulders, declaring that the Indians grew bolder every day, marauding and terrorizing incoming settlers. In fact, the U.S. had always had intended to clear the way for those seeking fortunes in California, and also confirm reports of valuable minerals in Navajo country. The treaty, women in the treaty. The treaty was already written from Washington. Women were left out. The men knew that women were supposed to be, or important. But the whole point, back in 1862, James H. Carleton, governor and commander of the New Mexico Territory, implemented a plan to relocate Navajos and Mescalero Apaches to Fort Sumner, also known as Bosque Redondo. There they would be grouped into villages and, quote, learn the arts of civilization, unquote. They would become farmers and Christians and send their children to American schools. And you've heard that's the long walk, and then the long walk home. And you've already heard of the Trail of Tears. There's many of these throughout the United States. Not just here, not just eastern area. California has some, Utah has some. There's been many massacres. And look at Pine Ridge. The massacre at Pine... Massacre at... what's it called? Massacre at Pine Ridge. Twice. 73. Wounded Knee. Massacre at Wounded Knee. This is American history.